Hi there, this is Alan, and in this crash course we will dive into front-end development. We will cover the basics of the main technologies that you need to know so that you can start programming in front-end as soon as possible. We will learn the basics of HTML, CSS and Bootstrap, and we'll conclude this series with a project, allowing you to code your first website in less than 2 hours. So what is the front-end? Front-end in programming refers to the part of a software application or website that users interact with directly. It covers the user interface and user experience, focusing on how the application looks and feels to the end users. Front-end development involves the use of technologies such as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create visually appealing, responsive, and interactive interfaces. The key components of front-end development are firstly HTML, which is the standard markup language used to structure content on the web. It defines the elements on a page, such as headings, paragraphs, images, and links. CSS then is a style sheet language used to style the HTML elements, controlling the layout, colors, fonts, and other visual aspects of a web page. It ensures a consistent and attractive presentation across different devices and screen sizes. Then there is JavaScript, which is the only actual programming language out of the three, and it is used to add interactivity to web pages. It allows developers to create dynamic content, handle user input, and update the interface in real time without requiring a page reload. Another key aspect worth mentioning is that front-end development often involves using frameworks and libraries to facilitate the development process. Examples include the React.js, Angular, and Vue.js, which provide pre-built components and structures to build interactive user interfaces more efficiently. To summarize, front-end development is a crucial aspect of the overall web development process, working in conjunction with back-end development or the server side to deliver a complete, functional, and user-friendly application. HTML, which stands for Hypertext Markup Language, is the standard markup language used to create and design web pages. HTML is not a programming language, but as already mentioned, it is a markup language which handles the aesthetics of a web page. HTML allows you to organize and present information on the web, including text, images, links, forms, and more. This language has only two main concepts, which are the tags and the attributes. Tags are used to define the different elements of the web page, which we'll see in a bit, while attributes provide additional information about the elements. So the best code editor to actually code in HTML would be Visual Studio Code, and that is what we are using today. Here we are in Visual Studio Code, and it is actually a good practice before starting a project in VS Code to actually create an empty folder and then to open that folder so that every file that we create will be stored in that same folder or in the same directory, so to say. So I'm just going to my desktop. I'm creating like a blank folder here, new folder. I'm naming it Frontend Intro for the name of the series. And I'm going back to VS Code. Click here on Open Folder. Let me just find the folder that I just created. Select folder. Okay, so here on the left side we can see the directory or the name of the folder that we created, and on the right we have an icon here to add the file. So we are creating an HTML file, giving a name to it of index, and it's just required for it to end in HTML, so .html. Click on enter, and here is our file. So what we'll do right now, actually I'm just going to create a basic HTML file, and I'm going to explain to you the structure of it from top to bottom. So a quick way to actually write the basic HTML file is to write the exclamation mark here and click enter. And here we have the structure of a basic HTML file here. So let's start from the top. Here in this tag here, this is basically a document type declaration, which what it does, basically it just defines the version of the HTML that this file has. In our case, it is HTML5, but this declaration might actually just also change in the future, so you just do not need to learn it by heart. And then underneath we have the three main elements of an HTML page. Let me just indent the head and the body here. So we have firstly the HTML element, which is the root element of an HTML file, and then we have the head element and the body element. As we can see here, most of the elements in HTML have an opening tag and a closing tag. We can see that the difference between the opening tag and the closing tag here is that the closing tag also has a forward slash in the beginning, and usually in the opening tag we put attributes to the element. So in this HTML element here we can see the attribute length equals to n. So this is basically a way to give a value to an attribute. This length stands for language, and it basically just tells the browser that the language of the text in this HTML element is in English. And we can see that the value was given to this attribute in a form of a key value pair, as we have seen in dictionaries as well. Then here inside the HTML element we have the head element firstly. The head element contains information, some meta information or information about the HTML file. So firstly here we see this meta tag, which basically has an attribute here of char set. What this tag here does is basically defines the character encoding, which is UTF-8 in our case. This character encoding here basically supports a lot of characters. And underneath this second meta tag that we have here, it takes here we see different attributes taking different values. So basically what it does is that it gets the viewport of each device and sets the width of it to the device width, and also sets the initial scale to be 1. So basically it gives them a zoom, an initial zoom to the web page. Underneath here we have this title element, which consists of an opening and a closing tag. So what we write in the title element is what we actually see in the tab bar or the title bar when we open a web browser. And that was it for the head element. And then the body element is basically the main part of an HTML file, where basically the whole content of the file is written inside of it. And each HTML file then ends with the closing HTML tag, which basically tells the browser that this was the end of the HTML it needs to render. What I would want you actually to do next is to go on the left panel here and click on extensions and search for an extension called Live Server. Click on it. I have actually installed it, but you just need to click install. So what this does is basically, if you would run the project as it is, for each change we would make to the file, we would need to refresh the browser. This Live Server plugin basically refreshes the browser itself as soon as we save the HTML file. And we'll actually see how this works. So to run the file here, you just need to click with the right button of the mouse and go to Open with Live Server. And we'll actually see the HTML page rendered on the browser, the HTML page that we just created. Let me just make the page a bit smaller. Okay, so what this, let me just change the appearance here. So here we can see the title of our document, which is the document, what we wrote inside this title element, and then we actually don't see anything in the body. If we had written here a message like some text like hello world, and because of the plugin I just installed, I just need to save the file here with Ctrl+S, and we'll see that the browser refreshes itself and we see hello world here in the web browser. And what this Live Server plugin also did is actually that if you had tried to run the program before, you would see that the link now has changed. The live server plugin basically uses our computer as a server to serve the files to the browser. And here we see this is basically the IP address of our local host, then the port number, and then the file name. So basically you can see also the change in URL after you install this plugin. So what we'll see next in this video, I'm just going to introduce to you with the basic elements and the main elements that you need so that you can just start learning HTML. And basically HTML is like one of those languages that you just learn once, or you get an introduction of in like half an hour. You basically just fill the blanks in yourself by doing projects, which we'll do in the end of the series. But for now, I'm just going to start with the paragraph element actually. So that I don't write something stupid here, I'm just going to go to ChatGPT and ask it to give me 30 paragraphs. Okay, here we have these 3 paragraphs. They seem okay. Let me just copy them and paste them in our HTML file here in the body. As you can see them here, each of the paragraph is actually separated with one another with this empty line. So it's supposed to have some spacing, but if I just save the file, we should see the browser refresh. But the paragraphs are all attached to one another. This happens because the browser does not recognize these spaces that we have left here to separate the paragraphs. For this reason, we use the paragraph element with a set of paragraph tags because they give a spacing to the text inside of it. So let me just use, so I'm writing here P, the opening tag, and then Visual Studio Code just writes the closing tag for me. I'm going to need to write the paragraph inside this set of tags. If I save the file, we should see the first paragraph being separated with a line with the remaining 2 paragraphs. And I will do the same thing for the other 2 paragraphs that we have there. Okay, so if I save the file, we should see each paragraph being separated by one another with basically a new line here. So what we could actually add to this file is we'd add the title for each paragraph. For this reason, we use an element called heading in HTML. The heading just is written by a set of tags beginning with H, and then we have 6 different headings. From H1 to H6, and H1 is actually the difference between them is that H1 is the biggest in size, and then they come to be H2 is a bit smaller, H2 is even smaller, and then H6 is the smallest of them all. So I'm just going to begin with H1 firstly, and I'm going to write the title to the first paragraph, paragraph 1, save the file, and we should see this title here, this paragraph text here bolded, and it's bigger in size than the text that the paragraph had itself. I'm gonna use another heading for the second paragraph, let's say H2, so that you will see the difference. So paragraph 2, save the file. As we can see, the second heading is smaller but still bolded. And let me just use the smallest heading, the H6 heading for the last paragraph. Save the file, we see that the last heading is very, very small actually. I don't know if we would actually use it really in a project, but that's how big it is. Okay, let me just delete this firstly. What I want to show you next is the ordered and unordered lists. So a list basically just is used to list different elements, and we have two types of lists in HTML. The Ordered lists are written with a set of tags beginning with OL, so for ordered lists, and inside this set of tags we actually write the items of the list inside another set of tags which are written LI. Okay, so here let me just make a list of fruits like apple. Pear. And orange. Let me save the file. We should see these 3 elements being ordered with an index. So basically each of the elements will have an index starting from 1. The second element of the list has the index of 2, and so on. The only difference that this ordered list has with the unordered list is that you write it with the UL, and basically the elements are listed with like bullet points, as you can see here. Another piece of syntax I want to show you here is how to add comments in a HTML file. Let me just add some text there. This is a comment. Save the file. We see the text appear here in our browser, and to make this actually a comment, we are going to need the less than sign, the exclamation mark, 2 dashes, and at the end 2 dashes again, and the greater than sign. So every line in between here is basically a comment. Comments are used by us usually when programming, if we want to add a title to a piece of code or to explain some specific part of our application, either so that we remember in the future, or for someone else reading our code, so it basically knows what that part of code does. But yeah, just to get that out of the way. Okay, so now I actually want to introduce to you with the table element. To write a table in HTML, we need a set of table tags. So this table element here actually is used to create a table, and how we do it is basically we add elements to each row of the table. We can declare a row of a table with this tr set of tags, and inside here tr stands for table row. Inside here we actually write what we want in a row to be included. So the elements of the table are written within another actually set of tags, td for table data. And here basically firstly we declare a row, and then we store the elements that we want the row to have. So let me write some numbers there. 7, 8, 9. If I save the file, we should see 7, 8, 9 here. If I would want to add another row to the table, let me just copy and paste here. Save the file again. We see 4, 5, and 6 then in the second row of the table. Let me just add a couple of more rows. If I save the file now, what you will see here is basically a structure of a simple calculator. If you would actually want, even in the future, to create a functional calculator, this might actually be how you can do it with an HTML table. This is how you can basically make the structure. Let me delete the table again. The element that we'll see next is the image element. As I told you, most of the elements are presented by a set of tags, an opening and a closing tag, but the image element actually just contains one single tag. Its name is img, and it takes actually a couple attributes. The source attribute is the attribute where basically we store the address where the image is stored in our project. We do not have any image in our project here, but I just downloaded something before. And basically it's a good practice to store all of the images of a project inside a separate folder. That's why I'm creating a folder here, images, and here I'm gonna store the image I downloaded here before actually. So by dragging and dropping it, I'm actually gonna change the name of this file. It's too long. It's basically a photo of a golf ball. Click on enter, and now here in this source attribute I just need to write the name of the folder where the image is written, and then the name of the file, which was golf.jpg. And actually the image also takes another attribute that has to be, it takes multiple attributes, but another required one is the alternative attribute, where basically here we write a piece of text that is shown when for some kind of reason the image does not load. Then we should see the text that stands in between here. Let's say golf image or something. If I just save the file here, we see the image basically in these dimensions here. So we actually play around with the size of the image, with the image tag actually can take a width attribute to specify the width of the image, let's say 300 pixels, and the height attribute, let's say again 300 pixels. Saving the file, and we see the image now in the dimensions that we wanted it to be. Okay, so another piece of syntax or another element I wanted to present to you are the links. If you would actually want to, let me just delete the image firstly. So if you would want to add a link in our HTML file here, and we would like write it as a text here, let's say https://www.github.com. If I save the file, this link is basically rendered as a text in our browser, and we don't have an option to click on it. But for us to actually input links in our HTML files, we need to use the anchor tags. The anchor tags just begin with an A, are a set of tags, and in the opening tag we actually need to specify an attribute called href for hypertext link. Here we write the address of the URL that we want the link to, the anchor to redirect the users to, pasting it here, and here we can write like whatever, like click me inside this set of tags. Here we see this click me message, click me link here. It just took some styling by default, it's underlined, it's in blue, and if I click on it, should be able to go to github.com. So if I'm going back here, basically as soon as I hover over this link, you should see in the bottom of the page the address where the links redirects us to. And we see basically many times in different pages that some malicious links just redirect us to pages that should not actually redirect us to, and in most cases you can check it where the link takes you to if you just hover over the link, and you can see the address on the bottom of the page actually. The last bit of syntax I want to show you for today, for this short introduction video, are the forms and the inputs. So basically the form element is used to take input from the user, and inside the form element we actually take the input from the user by using the input element. So the input element consists of a single tag. Let me just write an example here. We can specify different attributes to input because we have different types of inputs. Let me make the type of the first input to text, save the file. save the file, we see this box here where we can input text inside of it. And actually why this form element is used is that for each input that is inputted by the user, basically the form takes some specific attributes, like an action attribute or like a method attribute as well, which basically redirects the data inputted by the user. Either it saves it to the database or does some specific operation with it. But for our case, since we are actually just seeing the visual part of inputs, we are not gonna make anything, we are not gonna give any value to those attributes. So basically we're just gonna focus on the display of the inputs. So here we saw this first input, which was a text input. Let me just create another input, or different inputs actually. So let's make it of type number. If I save the file, the second input here basically cannot take characters, cannot take text, but only numbers, and we can just play with it also with these errors that we have here. An input can be of type password, so that everything that we are writing here is encrypted. We cannot see it visually, but we have this option here to basically see, just like you see when you input a password in a page. And we have also other inputs. Let me just make another input here. Inputs can be also of type submit, which basically what this does is we see this button here, submit, and basically when we input data inside the other fields, this submit button basically submits the data that the user sent to where the form should actually redirect those data. As I was explained to you before, the form basically connects the user input to some function or some database or something to do a specific operation with them. But in our case, because we haven't connected the form, in our case that would not actually work. And let me just show you the checkbox input. Checkbox input allows us to basically select one or more of some options, and this, just worth mentioning, is that some of these inputs actually can take different attributes, like placeholder attribute, which basically tells the user to do something or what to enter in that input box, like enter a name. Saving the file, we should see enter a name here. We can make the inputs to be required. So what this means is you cannot submit the form if you do not basically write anything in this input box here. So if I try to run submit, we would see this message here to please fill in this field. And basically that was just like a short introduction of input types there. CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets, is a style sheet language used to make web pages look good by controlling their appearance and layout. In comparison to HTML, which handles the content of a web page, CSS takes care of the presentation of this content. CSS defines how the content is displayed on a web page, including the layout, colors, fonts, and other visual aspects. Regarding its syntax, CSS syntax consists of a set of rules that define how HTML elements should be displayed. Each rule typically consists of a selector and a declaration block. Selectors target specific HTML elements, then the declaration blocks, on the other hand, contain one or more declarations separated with semicolons. Each declaration itself consists of a property and a value. They are written in this form of key-value pairs separated by a colon. The entire declaration block itself is surrounded by curly braces. Now let's just take a look at selectors. Selectors are patterns used to target specific HTML elements to apply styles to. There are various types of selectors, including simple selectors, which select elements based on the element name, ID, or class. In this example, the element selector selects all paragraph elements on the page, making them center aligned and with a black text color. The ID selector then uses the ID attribute of an HTML element to select a specific element. And since the ID of an element is unique within a page, the ID selector is used to select one unique element. In contrast to the element selector, the ID selector begins with a hash character followed by the ID of the element. In this other example here, we have a class selector which selects HTML elements with a specific class attribute. To select elements with a specific class, we write a period character followed by the class name. Then we have combinator selectors, which select elements based on a specific relationship between them. The descendant selector matches all elements that are descendants of a specified element. The example here selects all paragraph elements inside div elements. There are also child selectors, which select all elements that are the children of a specified element. The following example selects all input elements that are children of a div element. Pseudo-class selectors select elements based on a certain state. This selector here selects all div elements when we hover over them with the mouse and sets their background color to blue. There are also pseudo-element selectors which select and style a part of an element. The first line pseudo-element is used to add a special style to the first line of a text. The following example formats the first line of the text in all paragraph elements. The last selector type we're going to see are attribute selectors, which select elements based on an attribute or attribute value. The following example selects all input elements with a required attribute. Okay, so I have opened up Visual Studio Code here, and after creating a basic HTML page, I just filled it with a bit of code. As you can see here, the page consists of three main parts, which are the header section, the main section, and the footer section. All of these three elements do not add some specific styling to the page, but except for the fact that they make the code more readable. So in the header section, we put what we want to be on top of the page. In the footer section, we write what we want to be on the bottom of the page, and in the main section we basically write the main part of our application. These three elements also just serve to give some additional information about the page to like search engines or a screen reader and so on. And here inside the header section I have just inputted a navigation element as well, which basically serves to input a list of links. And inside the navigation section, here we have an unordered list with three list elements. Each list element contains an anchor tag, and all actually redirect the user to the index.html file, since this is actually the only file we have in this project. And as you can see on the right as well, this basically gives us the idea of a navigation menu that we see in basically every web page. Then in the main section, inside this main element, we have three paragraphs inputted inside these paragraph tags, and on the end, inside this footer element where we input what we usually see on bottom of the page. Usually you can see there the name of the page, and then this copyright symbol. Here I have used, this is what's called an HTML entity, which basically just gives us this copyright symbol here on the right. And right now what we're going to do to this HTML page, we're just going to see how we can add styling to it with CSS. So there are three main ways to load CSS into our HTML file. The first one is by using inline style. Inline style basically means that we have to write the styling to each specific element in the code. Let me just give you an example here. So if we would want to write the styling for this paragraph element, we're going to use the style attribute, and let's say I'm playing with the font size property, and I'm setting the font size of the text in this paragraph element to be 18 pixels. Pixel is basically like a size unit, a common size unit in CSS, and if I save the file, here we should see the text here is a bit bigger. So this is how the inline styling works. Here we actually do not use a selector, which we saw before in the video, and we just use this style attribute. And the What's wrong with actually this method is that if we would want to actually apply this styling to other elements, let's say to other paragraphs as well, we are going to need to input it in each specific element, this styling. And another drawback is the fact that the HTML actually should only contain the content about the web page and not the presentation and the styling. The second option, how we can actually load CSS into our file, is by using the style tag inside the head element. So we can go in the head element here and use the style element, which is a set of tags. And inside here, we basically write the CSS code. Let me just delete what we wrote here below. And to actually apply this styling to each specific, to all of the paragraphs in our page, I'm going to access them with the name of the element, then curly braces. Here I'm putting the font size to be 18 pixels. Even though this way we can see that the font size for each of the 3 paragraphs is now changed, it's bigger. And even though this second method is better than the first one, than the inline styling, because by just 3 lines of code we have applied the stylings to each paragraph, this is still not the best way to write CSS styling, because this way the code that we write in here can only be used inside this single HTML file. For this reason, now we are going to see the third and basically the recommended and the best way to write CSS code, which is by writing code in an external CSS file. So I'm going to go here in our project and I'm going to add in the directory here a CSS file. It is a common practice to call it style, but it's not necessary, and it just should end in .css. Saving the file, and here we basically need to include exactly the code that we wrote inside these style tags. So the syntax is the same. I'm saving the file, and now to link this style.css file with our HTML file, I'm going to need a link tag or link element. So link, we are going to need this attribute of rel, which basically means relation, and naming it style sheet, because this is what this file that we're connecting to our HTML page is. It's a style sheet file. And then we need to basically, this tag ends in a / and this greater than symbol. And this tag also takes another attribute, which is the href for hypertext reference, where we need to write the name of the file that we are linking to. So click enter, and if I save the file, we still should see that this file has the styles applied, written in our style.css file. Okay, so let us just go ahead and change different parts of our HTML page. Now, as we can see here, this is not as good looking as it should be, the elements in our navigation menu. So what we can do here, let me just access the unordered list element. And I'm just gonna need to remove these bullet points here. So I set using the list style type property and setting it to none. If I save the file, we should see the bullet points being removed here. And all of these properties, actually these CSS properties that we have for each element, basically it's not that I learned them by heart, you just need to open up the documentation and search for them. And right now I would actually want to input these elements of the list, not like in a column, but in a line. For this, I'm going to need to access the li element, open up the curly braces, and I'm setting the display property to inline. If I save the file, we should see that they are now in a row. And this styling that we see here for that this home, store, and about text have, they basically have this because they have inherited it from the anchor tags. So let me just remove the underline and the color blue that this text has, these anchors have. So I'm just taking the anchor element and I'm putting the color to, let's say, black, saving the file here. We should see the color changed, and what I'm gonna do as well is I'm gonna remove the text decoration by writing here text decoration equals to none, so that we remove this underline here. And if we click in each of these anchor tags here, we should be redirected to index.html, since this is how we wrote this, because this is the only file that we have in this page. So let me do something else now. Here we have selected each element by using the element selector, but we can also use an ID. Let's say I'm going to access the footer element. I'm going to give footer element an ID like footer1. Save the file and give a second. Go back here to access an element by its ID. I'm going to need to use this hash symbol, then footer1, the name of the ID. I'm opening up curly braces and I'm putting the text align. I'm setting the text align to center so that this text is centered in the page here. And what I can do else, actually, we have seen the element selector and the ID selector, and the ones I actually use the most is the class selector. And let me just go here. If we would want, for example, to put some specific styling to only 2 paragraphs, not all of them, let me just give them a class of for paragraph. We can name it whatever. To the first 2 paragraphs, I'm giving this class and saving the file. I'm going here. I'm accessing this class by a dot symbol and then pair. I'm opening up the curly braces and I'm setting the, let's say, the font weight to bold. If we want to bold the first 2 paragraphs, let's say. I don't know why we would want to do that, but just if you would, that's how you can actually do it. And to select basically the whole page, we're gonna need to write this star symbol here. And then here we can, let's say, change the background color or change the font or anything about the whole page. This affects the whole page. Let's set the background color to, let's say, light smoke or light gray. What did I do there? So just light gray. Save the file. We should see the whole file has this light gray color. The CSS Box Model is a fundamental concept that describes the layout and rendering of elements on a web page. Each HTML element is actually rendered as a rectangular box composed of several parts, which are the content, padding, border, and margin. To actually see these 4 parts of an element, let me just make the page a bit bigger here, and I'm gonna here select this My Page element. Click on with the right of the mouse and click then in Inspect. Here underneath we see that the footer consists of the content here, the padding, which is 0, border is 0, and the margin, which is 0. So let's begin with the content. The content is the innermost part of the box and represents the actual content of the element, such as text, images, or other media. The content area is determined by the width and height of properties set for the element. Then we have the padding, which is the space between the content area and the element's border. It provides internal spacing within the element and helps create separation between the content and the border. Then comes the border that surrounds the padding area and defines the boundary of the element. So it provides a visible or invisible border around the content and padding. Borders can have different styles, such as solid, dashed, dot, etc. They can have different widths and colors as well. Then there is the margin, which is the space outside the border of the element and provides spacing with the other elements. Margins do not have a background color and do not contribute to the size of the element itself. To see how this actually works, let me just minimize the page one more time and go to the style.css file. Here, where we selected our footer by the ID, let me just input a width, a manual width, and set it to, let's say, 200 pixels to our footer. And then I'm going to add padding to it let's say 20 pixels. I can make the margin to be like 30 pixels, and I'm giving it a border of size 1 pixel, then or like 2 pixels. I'm making it solid, so it's not dashed or anything like that, and the color I'm setting it to be black. If I save the file, this is our footer now, so let me just I inspect this one more time here, and we can basically see that the width is 200 pixels here. Then we have the padding, which is 200 pixels. The border is supposed to be around 2 pixels here, and we see the margin, which is the space with the other elements, as you can see on the left here, which is on bottom, on top, on the left, and on the right. Bootstrap is a powerful front-end framework for building responsive websites and web applications. In simpler terms, Bootstrap is like a toolbox filled with ready-to-use items for building websites. It provides pre-made pieces of code like buttons, forms, and menus that you can easily plug into your website to make it look good and work well. It also helps your website look good on different devices like phones and tablets without you having to do extra work. So Bootstrap lets you focus on the unique parts of your website while taking care of the basics for you. So to actually get started with Bootstrap, we're going to need to import a couple of files from the getbootstrap.com website. So I'm just going there and going to the documentations. Here in this part is specified that we need to import firstly a link to the Bootstrap's CSS file, and then a script tag to link to the JavaScript that Bootstrap offers. So I'm just going back to our project and I'm inputting this link tag here in our head element, just the way that we link a CSS file that we have created ourselves to our HTML page. That's just the same way we are actually linking our HTML file to this Bootstrap's file. And I'm just going back here and I'm going to copy also this script tag. And if you would want to check out what these files are that we are linking our HTML file to, let me just copy this link and put it in the browser. And basically this, what we see here is the Bootstrap's file, and I'm just gonna remove this .min part here because it just removes the white spaces and so that the page is a bit more visible. Here we can see tons of CSS code where the programmers at Bootstrap have specified different properties about the elements of the page, and mainly tons of classes that we can use in order to customize our HTML files by using what they have written here. So I'm just going back to our project here and we're gonna start seeing Bootstrap. One of the main features that Bootstrap offers is its grid system. Bootstrap's grid system is used to lay out and align content in our page, and it consists of 3 main sections, which are the container, the rows, and the columns. The container basically wraps the grid, and then the rows represent a single row in this grid system, and then the columns are the building blocks of this grid system, and a single row can contain up to 12 columns. To basically see how this works, I'm just gonna give a container class to a div by just this short form here. So by just writing dot, the name of the class, if I hit enter here, a div with a class of container, I have written this wrong, container is created, and this container class actually on itself just gives some padding and some styling to the content that's inside of it. So if I'm just inputting some plain text here, we will see that the text has some padding on the left and on the right, but I'm just gonna remove this text because I'm gonna input a rows and some columns inside of it. So by just adding that row here and hitting enter, I have created a div with a row class, And inside of this row, we are gonna input, let's say, 3 columns. 3 divs with the column class. I'm naming this column 1. And let me just copy this, paste a few others. If I save the file, we see 3 columns in a single row. But to see this a bit clearer, let me just give a border to each of our columns. So by giving to the style attribute border to be 1 pixel, solid and black. And I'm just copying this styling for every other div. I'm saving the file, and as we can see, the single row contains 3 columns now, and each column has the same amount of space. Even if we make the screen bigger, still each column has the same amount of space, because that's actually how we have specified this. But we can define ourselves how much space we want each column to have in our row by just giving it the class that it needs to get. So by just, if I would write in the second column here, col -8, what this would do is that it would give to the second column 8 out of 12 columns of space that a row can take. And if I save the file, here we can see that the second column here has 8 out of 12 available spaces that this row has, and the other 2 columns can contain the remaining space in the same proportion. And even if I make the screen here to be bigger, this will basically be the same. The second column will take 8 out of 12 available spaces that we have here. If we would, let's say, we could just make the second column to contain half of the space by just writing col -6, because the second column will contain 6 out of 12 possible columns. And as you can see, this space here is equal to the half of the entire space that the row can have. If, let's say, one of the columns contains, like the third column contains 8 columns of space, this would be more than a single row can take. And if I save the file here, we'll see that the third column is now pushed to the second row, to the next row. Another concept that is actually important to know about Bootstrap is that Bootstrap is broken up in several different breakpoints. So basically, the programmers at Bootstrap have written some media queries where it's specific, or it's certain pixel values. The styling that we apply using Bootstrap can be changed so that it's appropriate for different screens. But there are actually 6 breakpoints, which are extra small, small, medium, large, extra large, and extra, extra large. And let's say if I would want all of the columns to have the same amount of space in a single line, I would leave it as it was in the beginning. But if I would want the second column to only contain half of the space when the screen is large, I'm going to need to write here -LG for large screens, which is basically a specific screen size, and then dash the amount of space that this column will take if the screen is large. So if I save the file, here in the beginning we won't see any change, but if I start making the screen bigger, when the screen reaches this specific pixel value, so it's large, we see that the second column will contain half of the space that a row can take. And we can basically use these breakpoints for most of the styling, or for every styling that we apply to our elements. So let me just leave it firstly as it was in the beginning. And I would also want to mention here that we can offset, or we can basically separate columns with one another with specific columns of space. So let's say if I write in the second column here offset 2, what this will do is that it will leave 2 columns of space from the first column. So if I save the file, we'll see that here between the second column and the first column there are 2 columns of space. What I want to mention also is that we can actually add classes also to our row class here in the beginning. And if we would want, for example, we can specify how many columns a row can take. So if I write here the class row-cols and 2, this basically means that one row can take only up to 2 columns. And if I save the file, the third column will be pushed to the second row. And you can also use breakpoints in this case here as well. So I can change how many columns a row can take depending on the screen size. Let's say if I would want, in case the screen is extra large, I would want 30 columns in one row. I can write this piece of code here, and in the beginning, still we see that the row has only 2 columns, because that's how we specified it here. But if we make the screen extra large, it will take 3 columns. Let me make it a bit bigger. We can see here, in this case, the row contains 3 columns. And that's were basically the main things you need to know about the grid system that the Bootstrap has. So let me just remove this for now. So now we're going to talk about tables. Tables are one of the things that we'll actually customize a lot using Bootstrap. So I'm just importing a simple table here in our body. So basically a table with a head section, which contains a row inside of it. And then I think there are 3 rows here. If I just save the file here, we'll see that just by default, without adding to it any Bootstrap styling, the table doesn't look as well formatted as we would want it to be. There is no space in between the rows or columns, and the text is a bit small. How we can actually customize it using Bootstrap is by just adding a class of table in this table tag. If I just save the file, we will now see that the table looks much better. The rows and columns are separated by one another, the text is a bit bigger, and even if we make the screen to be bigger, it looks much better. Our table is also responsive in different screen sizes. Let me just make the screen small. Again, we can add different classes to customize our table. We can play around with its color by, if I just write here table dark in the class, save the file, we will see that the table now is dark, is black, and the text is automatically white. We can make our table to be stripped, which basically means that every other row will have this gray line. But actually, if we give the table the table hover class, what this basically does is a pretty nice feature that whenever we hover over each row, we see that the row is highlighted with this gray line. And we can actually make the table small. We can play around with its size by writing table-sm for small. We see the table there is a bit smaller. We can give it a class of table-large to make our table a bit larger. And if we would want to specify a specific row or to highlight a specific row or just table data, we can just give to it a class of table-active. If I save the file, we'll see that this table data here, this cell of the table is highlighted in gray. So another important Bootstrap feature that I would like to mention is that we can actually add a scroll bar to our tables in case the tables are too big, or if they contain a lot of columns. So let's just add some columns to our table. Firstly, let me just add some headers and also some other data in the rows below. Let me even just add some more there. That's not how we would want our table to look like, and to actually solve this, we just need to wrap our entire table inside a table-responsive class, so inside the div that has this class. So if I save the file now, we should see this scroll bar that allows us to basically scroll through the data of our table, and that could be actually useful if our table really has many columns and many data in it. And that's about it about the tables. Let me just remove this for a moment. So now we are gonna see forms using Bootstrap, how we can customize forms using Bootstrap. So let me just input a simple form here in our body. So basically here I have just a form, and inside of it we have a label, an input, and a button to submit the data. If I save the file, this is basically the styling. These elements have by default, but to actually style them using Bootstrap, we're going to need to add a couple of classes to the label and the input. So if I add to our label element a class of form label, and to our input here a class of form control, we would see that the appearance of our form changes here. If we can actually just click on the form, we'll see this nice autofocus feature. The form now takes the 100% of the width of the screen, and you can actually focus on the input by just clicking here the label, and you can see this blue outline that it has. We can actually add to our forms all of the other classes that we did before. If we, let's say, disable the input, we cannot input any data in it, and there are a few different kinds of inputs that we can use. One of them, let me just make the input type to be of color, and I'm adding to this class here form control color. That's the Bootstrap class that it takes, and basically in this input here we specify a specific color that we want. There are many different input types we can use. Let me just also demonstrate how range works. We need to give it a class of form range, and basically this is basically how the range input looks like. So let me just remove this form here, and I'm gonna leave only the button that we have here, so that we will check how we can style buttons using Bootstrap. There are actually a lot of components that we can customize using Bootstrap, but I'm just focusing on the buttons right now. And as you can see, this is how a button looks by default. If I give it a class of button, which is a Bootstrap class, this is how the button would actually look like. And there are basically 3 elements that we can style with this button. Let me just give to this button a color. We can give it a color with this button / primary class, which basically makes the button to be blue, and the text here is now, the text color is turned to white. There are actually 3 different elements that we can style with these classes that buttons take, which are also anchors and inputs. Let me just create an anchor tag here, and if you would see, if I give to this anchor tag a class of button and button primary, if I save the file, we'll see that they actually look exactly alike, even though the first one is a button and the second one is just an anchor. And also inputs can take the button classes, and if I give to this input a class of button primary, I'm giving it a value of submit, we'll see that the styling is basically the same, even though it's a bit bigger, the input. We can also just make just like we gave to our anchor a button style, we can give to the button an anchor style by just writing this button link class to our button. Our button now basically looks like a link. There are different kinds of classes we can give to our buttons. We can write this. We can make our buttons to be small or large by giving this button dash small class or large. We can actually change the class here to that gives our button a color to make it button dash outline primary. So whenever we hover over this button now, it gets the blue color. And these were some of the stylings we can give to buttons in Bootstrap. So this was the introduction to the Bootstrap basics, how it works, and some of the main things you can do using Bootstrap. Bootstrap also offers many utility and helper classes that you can use, but I did not want to make the video too long, so I would highly recommend for you to go to the documentation and check yourself for whatever you need. We will create a single product website using only HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. Throughout this tutorial, we'll cover all the essential components your website needs. From setting up a navigation menu to formatting images and icons, we'll walk through the process step by step. You'll learn how to structure your content effectively and make your site responsive across various devices. This is actually one of the first projects I have personally built when I first started programming. So let's just get started. So firstly, let's just create a folder to store our files in. I'm just here in my desktop, I'm creating a new folder. I'm naming it single product, since we're making a single product web page. And I'm going now to the VS Code. I'm opening the folder that I just created here. Let me find it. Okay, so here's our empty folder. Let me just increase the view a bit. Let me just zoom in. Okay, so firstly, I'm just going to create an HTML page. I'm just naming it index.html. And to just create some boilerplate code, I'm just adding the exclamation mark here, and then I'm hitting enter. Here we have the structure for a basic HTML page. And firstly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and grab the Bootstrap files that we're going to need for our project that we're actually going to use. So just go to getbootstrap.com, here in the documentations. Here in this section here, firstly we need to grab the link to link our file to the Bootstrap CSS file and input it here in the head section. And we're also going to need to grab the script tags to link our project to the JavaScript file of Bootstrap. So just like that. Inputting it before our body ends. And here we have imported the Bootstrap to our file, and let's just begin coding. I'm just going to change the title here. I'm just making the title of our web page, what we see in the tab, to be store. And let me just run our project here. I'm just going to open it with live server. And we should basically just see an empty file with the name store in the tab here. And let's just begin creating our web page. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to go and grab the navigation menu from Bootstrap. We're going to create a navigation menu here with basically just two pages. We're going to have a home and an about page. And you're going to see how we can actually use a navigation menu and how you can link this to other pages. So this is actually pretty simple with Bootstrap. Just let me find here in the section the documentation for the navigation. Here it is, Navbar. And let me just grab a simple navigation here. I think this is fine. Let me just copy it. Go back to our project, and I'm inputting here in the beginning of our body. And let's see what we have here. If I just save the file, you should see this navigation menu, this nice toggle button that when the screen is small, the menus are not shown here, but they can be displayed with this toggle button here. And we can see we have a home page, a features page. So basically these are the items of our navigation menu. And I'm just gonna delete a few of them. I'm just gonna leave 2. Let me just leave these 2 last list elements. And basically, as you can see here, how this is structured, it's a navigation element. And then inside here, we have all of these links. We have basically in the beginning, like a link here with the name of we see Navbar here, but here is basically where we write an icon or like the name of our web page. And then down below we have a button here, this toggle button that just makes it possible to show the navigation items when the screen is small, as I said. And here we have an unordered list with a few list elements, and all of them have these Bootstrap classes. What I'm gonna do right now, I'm just gonna change the name of these links. So we're going to create a bit later an about page, but I'm just going to write about here for now. And as we can see, we have now a home and an about. Navigation items. I'm also going to link now this. Let me just substitute this navbar here with like the name of our web page. I'm just going to name it stores. Haven't thought of a name for our store right now. And what we would want to do is we would want to link this here with the link of the web page, so that when the users are on different pages, if they click on the name of the page, they will be redirected to the home page. So basically I'm just writing to this href attribute the name of the index.html, which is the name of the file that we want to be displayed there, and we're gonna put this href attribute also on this first navigation item here that takes us to the home page. So index.html, and basically that was how simple we can import and like modify the navigation menu from Bootstrap. What we're gonna do now after this navigation menu, I'm just gonna take a container div. And here, firstly, I'm gonna, in the first section of our web page, I'm just gonna input like some text and an image to our product. So I'm just gonna need a row div, and inside of it, a couple of columns. So div elements with the column class. Just save it. Here in the first part, I'm just gonna input like a header, an h1 header, with some text like the watch you have been waiting for. And underneath I'm just gonna input like a div with basically only $300 with a price. Underneath I'm gonna have a button as well, and I'm giving it, let's just make the text of the button to be buy now, and I'm giving it some classes, some Bootstrap classes to make the button a bit better looking, and to give it like a light blue color with this button info class here. If I just save the file, this is what we see. Basically this heading here, the price of our watch, and the button here. I'm gonna give some margin to the button to be a bit, to have some spacing between this text and the button. I'm just giving it a margin of 2. That's basically how you give margins in Bootstrap, by just writing m dash, and then you can input numbers from 1 to 5, I think. Here we see some margins that the button has from the text above. We can actually make this price here to be bolded if we input some strong tags. here and input the price inside of it. If I save the file, the price now is bolded as well. And the next thing I'm gonna do, let me just handle now the second column. We'll basically style this in a bit, but I'm gonna actually need an image to display here in this part. So what we will do firstly, I'm just gonna going to my project here, and I'm gonna create not a file, but a folder, an images folder to store our images. I basically have downloaded before a few images that we could use. So let me just drag and drop this in this images folder. Okay, so I'm just gonna rename them in order to access them a bit faster. I'm naming the first one image1, and the second one image2. And okay, I'm going back to our index.html file. I'm going to need an image element. In the source attribute, I'm going to need write the address of the image I'm going to input here, so which was images, the name of the folder, and then I'm inputting here the first image. We need the alternative attribute, which basically where we basically just write an alternative, some text that is displayed when the image is not loaded in the web page for some kind of reason. So like image one photo or something. If I save the file now, you should basically see this image, which is a bit too big. And how we can actually fix it is I'm going to give to this image tag here a class of image1, and I'm going to style this in a separate CSS file, which I'm going to create right now. Going here to the project, writing a style.css file. Here we can just access the class with a dot and then img1. Opening up curly braces, I'm gonna give to this image a maximum width of 400 pixels and a maximum height of 400 pixels as well. I'm saving the file. What we're going to need to do now is going to link this CSS file to our HTML file. So with a link attribute, with a link element here, relation is a style sheet file, and then href here, the name of the file. Let me just close this tag. If I save the file now, we should see that the image is 400 pixels wide, and that's its height as well. So now that we have the image as well, we're gonna basically play around a bit with how this now looks. So in this row here, I'm gonna give to our elements a class of align items center, which basically just aligns the items in the center vertically. If I save the file, we should see now that the text is moved a bit below in the middle of its div element. And also I'm gonna make the text to be, I'm gonna give to this div a text center class to basically also center the text also horizontally. And you can see that the text now is also horizontally in the middle, even if we make the page bigger. And what is left for us to do now here is basically we're gonna play around with the classes of these divs. So I would want for our web page to have this column and this second column in a separate row when the screen is small, and then when its screen is like medium and above, I would want it to be in one line. So firstly, I'm going to give a column of 12 to these two columns to list 2 divs, which basically means that the columns will take 12 out of 12 available spaces that the Bootstrap line has. If I save the file, we should see now that each of these columns is in a separate line, but we would want to change that if the screen is like medium and above. So I just writing this call dash medium here, MD, and I would actually want for the text to have 7 out of 11 spaces, available spaces, and the second column I would want it to have 5, so the remaining spaces 5 out of 12. So if I save the file, right now we don't see the change, but if we make the screen a bit bigger, when the screen reaches the medium size, we see now that this text takes 7 out of 12 spaces and the image takes 5 out of 12 available spaces. And that's basically how Bootstrap helps us to make our web page responsive in different screen sizes. Let me just minimize the page again. What is left for us to do here is that I'm actually going to create another class in our style.css file. I'm naming it section. I would actually want each section, we're gonna have 3 sections in our web page, to be as big as the view height, or basically the view that the page has. So I'm giving to this height, to this section class, a height of 100 view height. And you will see in a bit what this does. Let me go to the index page and give this class to our div here that has the row class. So section, if I save the file, now we should see that the page takes as much space as the whole view height. So the height of this section is like 100%, so to say. And that was basically it for the first section. Now, second section here, it will be similar to the first one, but it will just have an image and also some text like describing the watch that we are presenting in our web page. So basically I'm just gonna copy this first section here and inputting it here, and I'm just gonna put the image first and then the text. So I'm cutting this part and inputting on the top. I'm just going to change here the class of the image because I'm making it a bit smaller. So I'm going to give a class to our image, and the image now will be image2. And the alternative attribute here will take image2 photo. If I save the file, now, yeah, we see the image is too big. So I'm just going to style it in our style.css. I'm just giving it the class of image2 and max width. I'm setting it to be 300 pixels and max height to be 300 pixels as well. And this is the image we're seeing. I also am gonna give a border radius to our image, which basically just rounds a bit the corners, and it will give it a shape of like a circle. If I make the border radius here to 50%, as you can see, the image now has this basically this oval shape that you can see right here. Going back to our index.html file now, and what we're gonna have in the second column here is we'll have basically a couple of paragraphs explaining our product. So how we're gonna take the text for this, I'm just going to ChatGPT and telling it to give us a description for a watch to sell in a website. It will give us like some nice text, I would suggest. Okay, firstly, I'm just gonna have 2 paragraphs, like the second one here. And also another one. I'd suggest it would be okay. It would be enough. I'm inputting it here. If I save the file now, we should see these two separate paragraphs. If we make the page also bigger, we can see that this section now as well has 100% of the height, so 100 view height, as we gave it also the section class. We see the image is on the left and the text is also centered horizontally and vertically. On the right, not here, because the second section also took the same classes that the first section took. I would suggest this looks now okay. We see that when the screen reaches the medium size, then we have these two columns in the same line or row. And I would also just give some class to our images in our style.css file. So I'm making our images to have an opacity of 70%, but only when we hover over our images. So what this basically means is just it takes all of the image elements and specifies that when we hover over them, the opacity of our images will change to 70%. So as you can see here, if I just hover over the image, it just has this nice bit of feature that the opacity is a bit smaller. Okay, that was basically it also for the second section. So in our third section here, it will have also the basic structure, but with a different kind of content. So I'm just copying the last section again. And what I'm going to actually input here, I'm basically going to input like an icon and a paragraph. So usually in some web pages, you see this nice little icons at the end where basically you see specific details about the price, about the shipping, or about basically reviews of the product. So I'm gonna need to input some nice little icons in this section. Where I'm gonna get them is basically there is a web page called Font Awesome. And if I actually click first the Font Awesome library, I'm just gonna need to import this library just like we import the Bootstrap library. That's the same way we will import this library from this website to basically be able to input some nice icons in our web page. So I'm just copying the link tag here and I'm inputting it here in our head element. Basically just like exactly the same way we're importing Bootstrap. And now to search for the icons we would want, just go to the Font Awesome website here. And go to icons. I'm gonna search, let's say, for a star icon. Okay, I'm gonna take the first one. Here you see the HTML tag that you would need, and I'm inputting it here in our third section. This was our third section. I'm actually going to change the class of our third section because we will have two icons and two paragraphs. I'm going to make them to be, so firstly, when the screen is small, I'm going to leave it to have a whole row, and when the screen will be medium and above, I'm going to make it to have half of the space possible. And let me just input the icon here, save the file. If I go here, we should see this little icon, which I will change the size of it in a bit, but just as for now. Okay, let me just give a paragraph to this column, and I'm basically inputting some meaningless text there. I could also go to ChatGPT again and write something about good reviews of this website, but I'm just leaving it as it is just to save us some time. And I'm going to go and find the second icon. Let me just search here for dollar icon, this dollar icon, and I'm going to input it here, and also another paragraph. Let me just save the file and go back to our web page. Here we see this icon, the paragraph, the icon and the paragraph again, and I'm just going to make the screen bigger. And as you see, if the screen has a medium size or more, these two columns are in one line and have the same proportion, so half of the space that the line takes. And what we could do here is I'm going to play around a bit with the spacing of these icons. So I'm going to give them like a margin to the class of the icons. And I'm going to give this margin to the icon, actually not to the column. So these two icons have some margin with the text, and I'm actually gonna make these icons a bit bigger here in a style.css file. For us to change the size of our icons, we're gonna actually access the icon element with this, just with I, without any dot in the beginning, and we're gonna need to change the font size. So this is the property we're going to need to adjust, and I'm setting it to like 40 pixels. And you can see that the icons now are a bit bigger and they look much better. I'm also going to give them this effect when we hover over them to make the opacity to be 50%, let's say. Each time we hover over them, their opacity just changes a bit, and it's like a good little effect we can add in there. And that was basically it for the third section. Right now we are just gonna need to input a footer, and we're also gonna create like a simple and a quick about page. So just after our container ends with this closing div tag here, we're going to input a footer element. In here, what we're going to need inside of it is a div tag, and here firstly I'm just gonna take like an h5 header to basically just input the name of our web page. We just left it stored, so just store in here, and then in a paragraph tag, usually here we see this copyright, the year, this C like icon that we can basically take with an HTML entity, which is written with like this @ sign. You get this C for copyright symbol here, and then a dash and like let's say store.com, like the address of the website. And down below we're gonna basically what we're gonna input here as well is like an unordered list with some links to our, let's say, to our social networks. So I'm just taking like a UL here, and UL we're gonna take 3 list elements actually, but let me just input all of this text in the middle by just giving to our div here a class of text center. So we see the footer is now on the center of our page. To style our list with Bootstrap classes, I'm going to need to give a class to our UL element to be list inline, so that the list elements are in one line horizontally, and then each of our list elements will just take a class of list inline items. So basically inside each list element we'll take an anchor tag, where basically it will link to like our social network page, and this anchor basically in between will have an icon which will again take from the Font Awesome website. So this anchor will basically need to take like an href attribute, and let me just go to YouTube and just take its address in here, put it here in the href attribute, and inside of this anchor tag we are going to take like an icon from the Font Awesome website, let's say YouTube here. I'm going to take this icon and just input it in the middle of these anchor tags. If I save the file now, you will see this nice icon of YouTube. So the lists now will be ordered horizontally. Let me just copy this list here, this list element, and put it down below. And the difference here is the, oh sorry, I forgot to tell you that if we click on this YouTube icon now, we will be redirected to YouTube actually, since we linked our anchor to the YouTube's URL. And yeah, that's basically how it works. Now if I'm gonna change the href attribute of the anchor tag in the second list item to facebook.com, and now I'm just gonna need to import the Font Awesome icon. So let's just write Facebook here. I'm taking this one, it seems a bit old, but yeah, basically I'm just gonna need to, as you can see here, how the text, how the icon looks like. I'm just gonna need to substitute this with Facebook. And if I go to our web page, we see the Facebook icon here. If I click on it, we'll be redirected to the Facebook page. And basically the error that we are doing here is that we gave it a wrong class. As you can see, the icons are listed vertically, which they should have been listed horizontally, because the class here should be list inline item, not items. If I save the file, we see now that they are displayed horizontally. Let me just copy this again and input another icon, let's say for our Instagram page. I'm changing the anchor href attribute, so Instagram here, and I'm guessing the icon should be, the icon's name should be FA Instagram here. If I save the file, here we see the Instagram icon, and if we click on it now, we go to the Instagram's web page. And we can actually also add, like I forgot before, we can add an icon also to the name of our web page here on the navigation menu, because usually you see here a logo of the website, and I'm just gonna input like an icon for the store, like shopping, I know, something with like a shopping bag, I think would be okay. Just something else, well, it doesn't matter that much. Okay, I'm just taking the first one here, taking the icon, and I'm importing it actually here where we wrote the name of our web page in the beginning. And if I save the file, we should see now this icon. As you can also see, this icon is a bit too big, but this is only because we gave to all of our icons here in style.css like font size of 40 pixel. Could actually change that if we would want to. Let me just create a class for our icon to be small, like I small. and I'm giving it a font size of 20 pixels, I'm saying right now, and I'm giving this class to the icon, our icon here. So I small. So the icon now is small, as you can see. We could make it a bit bigger if we would want to, but I would suggest that looks okay. Let me just input it actually in the beginning of the text. So I'm putting the text afterwards. It seems a bit better right now. And the only thing for us to do now, as you can see, our first page, our home page is created. Looks okay, I would suggest. And it's responsive, as you can see. We can now just add like a plain page for our HTML, for our about page. So let me just go to our project files here. I'm gonna create an about.html page. HTML, if I can spell it correctly. Okay, and basically what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna import the whole of our HTML file here. I'm just copying it all and pasting it there for two reasons, because we're gonna need the navigation menu and the footer, but we would also just need to like input the links to our CSS, to our Bootstrap, to Phantasm website one by one. So I'm just saving us time, and I'm like copy pasting our entire index page, and here will basically just remove the text inside. So I'm just gonna leave the footer, the navigation menu, and all of the links. So if I save the file and I go to our about.html page, we're gonna need to link this. So we're gonna need to go to our navigation menu and link this about navigation item to our about page. So in this href attribute, I'm going to need to write about.html. And now if we click on the about, here we'll be redirected to our about page. And now we are going to actually, we see the footer is on top, but we have the navigation menu and the footer, and we're just going to input some main text there. So I'm going back to ChatGPT and like give me a description for an about page for a watches website, just to get some text to input there. I just hope we have something like our story, or I don't know why this is running so slowly. Okay, like I'm just going back here. I'm creating like a container div. Here I'm just gonna import like a header, an h2 header that basically says our story, and like paragraph with what I just copied. I'm gonna need to align everything here in the center, so I'm giving it this text center class, and I'm gonna just copy and paste the rest of the paragraph. I'm just taking another header, h2 header, saying our, I don't know what was written in there, our commitment, and then in the next paragraph, what I just copied, as we can see in here, the text is basically like is centered. Here we can give some padding from the top to the container with this M5 some margin from the top. We also could have just added something like why choose us there, just like another header. Inside a paragraph. Why choose us. This is a lot of text, but let's just take this part here, input it here, save the file just to fill it a bit, and yeah, it gives some padding to the heading and the paragraphs, but I'm just not handling that right now. So we can navigate now to the home page and to the about page. We see this was our main page, second section, these icons here, and the links in our footer. This brings us to the end of this project. I would suggest you to practice making this kind of websites in order to improve your skills in HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. You can try to add different elements or styling to them so that you can practice what you know and even learn new things along the way. That was it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you next time.